Section 65 of the Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beeton. Recipes, Chapter 27, Part 7. Tartlets. 1371. Ingredients. Trimming of puff paste, any jam or marmalade that may be preferred. Mode. Roll out the paste to the thickness of about half an inch. Butter some small round patty pans, line them with it, and cut off the superfluous paste close to the edge of the pan. Put a small piece of bread into each tartlet, this is to keep them in shape, and bake in a brisk oven for about 10 minutes, or rather longer. When they are done and are of a nice colour, take the pieces of bread out carefully and replace them by a spoonful of jam or marmalade. Dish them high on a white d'oyley piled high in the centre and serve. Time. 10 to 15 minutes. Average cost, a penny each. Sufficient. 1 pound of paste will make 2 dishes of tartlets. Seasonable at any time. Rolled treacle pudding. 1371. Ingredients. 1 pound of suet crust No. 1215. 1 pound of treacle. Half a teaspoonful of grated ginger. Mode. Make with 1 pound of flour a suet crust by recipe No. 1215. Roll it out to the thickness of half an inch, and spread the treacle equally over it, leaving a small margin where the paste joins. Close the ends securely, tie the pudding in a floured cloth, plunge it into boiling water, and boil for 2 hours. We have inserted this pudding, being economical and a favourite one with children. It is, of course, only suitable for a nursery or very plain family dinner. Made with a lard instead of suet crust, it would be very nice baked, and would be sufficiently done in from 1 1/2 to 2 hours. Time. Boiled pudding 2 hours, baked pudding 1 1/2 to 2 hours. Average cost 7d. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. Meat or sausage rolls. Ingredients. 1 pound of puff paste No. 1206. Sausage meat No. 837. The yolk of 1 egg. Mode. Make 1 pound of puff paste by recipe 1206. Roll it on to the thickness of about half an inch, or rather less, and divide it into 8, 10 or 12 squares, according to the size the rolls are intended to be. Place some sausage meat on 1/2 of each square, wet the edges of the paste, and fold it over the meat. Slightly press the edges together, and trim them neatly with a knife. Brush the rolls over with the yolk of an egg, and bake them in a well-heated oven for about half an hour, or longer should they be very large. The remains of cold chicken and ham, minced and seasoned, as also cold veal or beef, make very good rolls. Time. Half an hour, or longer if the rolls are large. Average cost, 1s. 6d. Sufficient, 1 pound of paste for 10 or 12 rolls. Seasonable with sausage meat from September to March or April. Somersetshire pudding. 1374. Ingredients. 3 eggs, their weight in flour, pounded sugar and butter, flavouring of grated lemon rind, bitter almonds, or essence of vanilla. Mode. Carefully weigh the various ingredients by placing on one side of the scales the eggs and on the other the flour, then the sugar and then the butter. Warm the butter and with the hands beat it to a cream. Gradually dredge in the flour and pounded sugar and keep stirring and beating the mixture without ceasing until it is perfectly smooth. Then add the eggs, which should be well whisked, and either of the above flavourings that may be preferred. Butter some small cups, rather more than half fill them, and bake in a brisk oven for about half an hour. Turn them out, dish them on a napkin, and serve custard or wine sauce with them. A pretty little supper dish may be made of these puddings cold, by cutting out a portion of the inside with the point of a knife, and putting into the cavity a little whipped cream, or delicate preserve, such as apricot, greengage, or a very bright marmalade. The paste for these puddings requires a great deal of mixing, as the more it is beaten, the better the puddings will be. When cold, they are usually called gâteaux à la madeleine. Time. Half an hour. Average cost, 10d. Sufficient for 6 or 7 puddings. Seasonable at any time. Suet pudding to serve with roast meat. 1375 ingredients: 1 pound of flour, 6 ounces of finely chopped suet, half a saltspoonful of salt, half a saltspoonful of pepper, half a pint of milk or water. Mode. Chop the suet very finely, after freeing it from the skin, and mix it well with the flour. Add the salt and pepper. This latter ingredient may be omitted if the flavour is not liked, and make the whole into a smooth paste with the above portion of milk or water. Tie the pudding in a floured cloth, or put it into a buttered basin, and boil from 2 1/2 to 3 hours. To enrich it, substitute 3 beaten eggs for some of the milk or water, and increase the proportion of suet. Time. 2 1/2 to 3 hours. Average cost 6d. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. Note. When there is a joint roasting or baking, this pudding may be boiled in a long shape, and then cut into slices a few minutes before dinner is served. These slices should be laid in the dripping pan for a minute or two, and then browned before the fire. Most children like this accompaniment to roast meat. Where there is a large family of children, and the means of keeping them are limited, it is a most economical plan to serve up the pudding before the meat, as in this case the consumption of the latter article will be much smaller than it otherwise would be. Sussex or hard dumplings. 1376. Ingredients: 1 pound of flour, half a pint of water, half a saltspoonful of salt. Mode. Mix the flour and water together to a smooth paste, previously adding a small quantity of salt. Form this into small round dumplings. Drop them into boiling water, and boil from half to 3/4 of an hour. They may be served with roast or boiled meat. In the latter case they may be cooked with the meat, but should be dropped into the water when it is quite boiling. Time. Half to 3/4 of an hour. Sufficient for 10 or 12 dumplings. Seasonable at any time. Vermicelli pudding. 1377. Ingredients: 4 ounces of vermicelli, 1 1/2 pint of milk, 1 1/2 pint of cream, 3 ounces of butter, 3 ounces of sugar, 4 eggs. Mode. Boil the vermicelli in the milk until it is tender, then stir in the remaining ingredients, omitting the cream if not obtainable. Flavour the mixture with grated lemon rind, essence of bitter almond, or vanilla. Butter a pie dish, line the edge with puff paste, put in the pudding, and bake in a moderate oven for about 3/4 of an hour. Time. 3/4 of an hour. Average cost, 1s. 2d without the cream. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. Vermicelli. The finest vermicelli comes from Marseilles, Nimes, and Montpellier. It is a nourishing food, and owes its name to its peculiar thread-like form. Vermicelli means little worms. Vicarage pudding. 1378. Ingredients: 1/4 pound of flour, 1/4 pound of chopped suet, 1/4 pound of currants, 1/4 pound of raisins, 1 tablespoonful of moist sugar, half a teaspoon of ground ginger, half a saltspoonful of salt. Mode. Put all the ingredients into a basin, having previously stoned the raisins, and washed, picked, and dried the currants. Mix well with a clean knife. Dip the pudding cloth into boiling water, wring it out, and put in the mixture. Having ready a saucepan of boiling water, plunge in the pudding, and boil for 3 hours. Turn it out on the dish, and serve with sifted flour. Time. 3 hours. Average cost 8d. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Suitable for a winter pudding. Vol au vent and entree. 1379. Ingredients: 3/4 to 1 pound of puff paste No. 1208, fricasseed chickens, rabbits, ragout, or the remains of cold fish flaked and warmed in thick white sauce. Mode. Make from 3/4 to 1 pound of puff paste by recipe No. 1208, taking care that it is very evenly rolled out each time to ensure its rising properly, and if the paste is not extremely light and put into a good hot oven, this cannot be accomplished, and the vol au vent will look very badly. Roll out the paste to the thickness of about 1 1/2 inches, and with a fluted cutter stamp it out to the desired shape, either round or oval, and with the point of a small knife make a slight incision in the paste all round the top, about an inch from the edge, which, when baked, forms the lid. Put the vol au vent into a good brisk oven, and keep the door shut for a few minutes after it is put in. Particular attention should be paid to the heating of the oven, for the paste cannot rise without a tolerable degree of heat. When of a nice colour, without being scorched, withdraw it from the oven. Instantly remove the cover where it was marked, and detach all the soft crumb from the centre. In doing this, be very careful not to break the edges of the vol au vent, but should they look thin in places, stop them with small flakes of the inside paste, stuck on with the white of an egg. This precaution is necessary to prevent the fricassee or ragoût from bursting from the case, and so spoiling the appearance of the dish. Fill the vol au vent with a rich mince, or fricassee, or ragoût, or the remains of cold fish flaked and warmed in a good white sauce, and do not make them very liquid, for fear of the gravy bursting the crust. Replace the lid and serve. To improve the appearance of the crust, brush it over with the yolk of an egg after it has risen properly. Time. 3/4 of an hour to bake the vol au vent. Average cost, exclusive of the interior, 1 6. Seasonable at any time. Note. Small vol au vents may be made like those shown in the engraving, and filled with minced veal, chicken, etc. They should be made of the same paste as the larger ones, and stamped out with a small fluted cutter. Sweet vol au vent of plums, apples, or any other fresh fruit. 1380. Ingredients: 3/4 of a pound of puff paste No. 1208, about 1 pint of fruit compote. Mode. Make half a pound of puff pastry by recipe No. 1208, taking care to bake it in a good brisk oven, to draw it up nicely and make it look light. Have ready sufficient stewed fruit, the syrup of which must be boiled down until very thick. Fill the vol au vent with this, and pile it high in the centre. Powder a little sugar over it, and put back in the oven to glaze, or use a salamander for the purpose. The vol au vent is then ready to serve. They may be made with any fruit that is in season, such as rhubarb, oranges, gooseberries, currants, cherries, apples, etc. But care must be taken not to have the syrup too thin, for fear of its breaking through the crust. Time. Half an hour to 40 minutes to bake the vol au vent. Average cost, exclusive of the compote, 1 shilling and 1 pence. Sufficient for 1 entremet. Vol au vent of fresh strawberries with whipped cream. Ingredients: 3/4 of a pound of puff paste No. 1208, 1 pint of freshly gathered strawberries, sugar to taste, a plateful of whipped cream. Note. Make a vol au vent case by recipe No. 1379, only not quite so large or quite so high as for a savoury one. When nearly done, brush the paste over with the white of an egg, then sprinkle on some pounded sugar, and put back in the oven to set the glaze. Remove the interior or soft crumb, and at the moment of serving fill it with the strawberries, which should be picked and broken up with sufficient sugar to sweeten them nicely. Place a few spoonfuls of whipped cream on the top, and serve. Time. Half an hour to 40 minutes to bake the vol au vent. Average cost, 2 shillings and 3d. Sufficient for 1 vol au vent. Seasonable in June and July. Strawberries. Amongst the Greeks, the name of the strawberry indicated its tenuity, this fruit forming hardly a mouthful. With the Latins, the name reminded one of the delicious perfume of this plant. Both nations were equally fond of it, and applied the same care to its cultivation. Virgil appears to place it in the same rank with flowers, and Ovid gives it a tender epithet, which delicate palates would not disavow. Neither does this luxurious poet forget the wild strawberry, which disappears beneath its modest foliage, but whose presence the scented air reveals. West Indian pudding. 1382. Ingredients: 1 pint of cream, half a pound of loaf sugar, half a pound of Savoy or sponge cake, 8 eggs, 3 ounces of preserved ginger. Mode. Crumble down the cakes, put them into a basin, and pour over them the cream, which should be previously sweetened and brought to boiling point. Cover the basin, well beat the eggs, and when the cream is soaked up, stir them in. Butter a mould, arrange the ginger around it, pour in the pudding carefully, and tie down with a cloth. Steam or boil it slowly for 1 1/2 hours, and serve with the syrup from the ginger, which should be warmed and poured over the pudding. Time. 1 1/2 hours. Average cost with cream at 1 shilling per pint, 2 shillings and 8pence. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. Yeast dumplings. 1383. Ingredients: half a quartern of dough, boiling water. Mode. Make a very light dough as for bread, using to mix it milk instead of water. Divide it into 7 or 8 dumplings, plunge them into boiling water, and boil them for 20 minutes. Serve the instant they are taken up, as they spoil directly by falling and becoming heavy, and in eating them do not touch them with a knife, but tear them apart with 2 forks. They may be eaten with meat gravy or cold butter and sugar, and if not convenient to make the dough at home, a little from the baker's answers as well, only it must be placed for a few minutes near the fire in a basin with a cloth over it, to let it rise again before it is made into dumplings. Time. 20 minutes. Average cost 4pence. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. Yeast consists principally of a substance very similar in composition and in many of its sensible properties to gluten, and when new or fresh, it is inflated and rendered frothy by a large quantity of carbonic acid. When mixed with wort, this substance acts upon the saccharine matter, the temperature rises, carbonic acid is disengaged, and the result is ale, which always contains a considerable portion of alcohol or spirit. The quantity of yeast employed in brewing ale being small, the saccharine matter is but imperfectly decomposed, hence a considerable portion of it remains in the liquor, and gives it that viscid quality and body for which it is remarkable. The fermenting property of yeast is weakened by boiling for 10 minutes, and is entirely destroyed by continuing the boiling. Alcohol poured upon it likewise renders it inert, on which account its power lessens as the alcohol is formed during fermentation. Yorkshire pudding, to serve with hot roast beef. 1384. Ingredients: 1 1/2 pint of milk, 6 large tablespoonfuls of flour, 3 eggs, 1 saltspoonful of salt. Mode. Put the flour into a basin with the salt, and stir gradually to this enough milk to make it into a stiff batter. When this is perfectly smooth, and all the lumps are well rubbed down, add the remainder of the milk and the eggs, which should be well beaten. Beat the mix for a few minutes, and pour it into a shallow tin, which has been previously well rubbed with beef dripping. Put the pudding into the oven, and bake it for an hour, then for another half hour. Place it under the meat, to catch a little of the gravy that flows from it. Cut the pudding into small square pieces, put them on a hot dish, and serve. If the meat is baked, then the pudding may at once be placed under it, resting the former on a small 3-cornered stand. Time. 1 1/2 hours. Average cost 7pence. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable at any time. End of section 65.